what is possible with Brazil now. So I start talking about Brazil. As you can see, Brazil is, Brazil is this, here. Brazil is this country in the map here. We're in South America. We have borders with all South American countries except for Ecuador and Chile. Last time I checked, we were 180.294 million people. There is a clock that goes on checking this in a website, in a Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics website. Brazilian GNP, now we are the 6th biggest economy in the world. But at the end of 2010, our GNP, our yearly GNP was $2.172 trillion for the year, and it had experienced a 7.5% increase. This number is very high, and it wasn't repeated in 2011, but it shows how our economy is changing very soon. Another very important and relevant indicator is the Gini index. Gini index is an index that economists and geographers and sociologists use to measure inequality in a society. It's how much the distribution of wealth is not progressive. So a Gini index of 1 would be a totally egalitarian society. And Gini index in Brazil rose from 0.3 measured by OECD in 2007 to 0.53 stated by the World Bank in 2010. Now the Gini index in Brazil is the highest in 50 years. So the perspective for the country is very, very optimistic. In this context, I would like to say a few words about education in Brazil. What is education like in this country? Our education system in general is comprised by compulsory fundamental education. Up to high school education is compulsory for everybody, and we divide the education in primary from 6 or 7 to 14 years of the kids, with an initial series from 6 or 7 to 10, and final between 11 and 14. And this part of the education is provided by the cities, by the municipalities. And high school is provided by the states. Brazil is divided in 27 states. And higher education, in principle, is a responsibility of the federal government. And that's determined like that in the Constitution. And of course, higher education ranges from age 18 to 24. Education, both basic and higher education, is open to private enterprises. Anybody can open a school, a private school. And public education is free, and this is written in the Constitution, and I'm going to stress it later on. All public education, including higher education, is provided for free in Brazil. There is nothing like tuition fees in the public schools. The public fundamental schools have several problems that I won't go into here because it would take more than an hour to talk about. But the consequences of a poor infrastructure and poor formation of the teacher is that we have a chronic high retention rate. Many of the kids are not allowed to be promoted from one year to the next year. And we have a very high dropout rate, especially during high school. 30% of the people who start high school will not end high school. So this already gives hints of a society where opportunities are restricted to part of it. But we have also a very reasonable public university system with a very, very selective access procedures. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this later on. So I'd like to say a few words about higher education in Brazil. Higher education system is opposite from what goes on in the United States or in Canada, but very similar to other Latin American countries. It's a very highly regulated system. We have regulatory boards for all levels, and the regulatory boards are also responsible for evaluation and accreditation of higher education institutions. So every higher education institution in Brazil has to be accredited by a federal, either a federal or a state organ. So, and for people who are not used to this, it sounds weird. It may sound a bit weird, but the Constitution of Brazil states that public education shall be free in all levels. So we provide higher education for free for foreign students, even who come here. And university education is based on the inseparability of teaching, research, and services. This is, in my opinion, a mistaken reading of the Humboldt project for the University of Berlin in the late 18th century. The late 19th century, where he did a project of what a university should be. And us Brazilians copied this project, and we decided that all our universities need to have inseparability of teaching, research, and services, which means that, in principle, all Brazilian universities are research universities. Of course, this is not true, and traditionally, it's not the current government, but traditionally, we don't pay enough attention to vocational training. We have a very small number of vocational training centers, and a very small part of the enrollment in higher education is in vocational education. A few, like 10 or 15 years ago, there was some people devised a way to circumvent the Constitution. They created a category they call centros universitários, which are not, they have the university in their name, but they are like university centers. They are institutions where you can have services and teaching, but you're not obliged to have research. And then they can be less regulated than the institutions which are not university centers, and they can open places for students as they will, and they do not need the federal government, the regulatory board to determine how many places they can offer. This is also, I'm already talking about something that I'm going to talk later, which is the fact that we work always in Brazil with numerous clauses. For every course, we have a number of places that can be occupied. In all this situation, we have a very small percentage of the 18 to 24-year-old cohort enrolled in higher education. Only 15% of the 18 to 24-year-old cohort is enrolled in higher education, and of them, 56% are enrolled in for-profit institutions. I'm not saying anything bad or wrong about this, but mainly the for-profit institutions in Brazil, as elsewhere, are not research institutions, and the kind of training that they provide is very close to what a vocational training center should provide. So you see that there is one regulation, and there is in practice, the whole system accommodates in order to respond to the demand for education of the population. To have high school education compulsory is a relatively recent move. It happened like 12 or 13 years ago. So we are still getting a wave of demand for higher education that just didn't exist in the years 15 years ago. Another characteristic of the Brazilian system that I always stress when I give this kind of talks is that even the best universities have curricula which are directed for professional training. I mean, when you have nothing like college education, like general education as you have in the United States and in parts of Canada. All Brazilian students, with very, very few exceptions, have to choose their major when they apply for higher education. I had myself a bad experience with this. I joined engineering school and I ended up as a physicist, but just because we had to choose what we wanted to do at the moment we entered the university. So as I said, fundamental education has huge enrollment. 17 million people are now studying in primary initial education. Like 13 million are in high school. We already lost part of them, but 30% of these people are lost when, 20% of them are lost before they go to high school. Before they go to high school. And from here we're going to lose another 30% who are going to end up high school and be able to start higher education. And this is a situation that we Brazilians will have to cope in the years to come. About higher education, I also like always to give an idea of the size of what we are talking about. In Brazil, we have nearly, these numbers are from 2010, we had nearly 2,400 total higher education institutions, out of which 190 are universities. Half of these universities are public universities, mostly federal. At that moment there was 58, now there are 61, and we had, by the end of 2010, 38 state universities and 5 municipal universities, which are an exception to the rule. We had 89 private universities, half of them for-profit and half of them not for-profit, mainly community, which are not like community colleges, but they are community universities or confessional universities. There is a very important group of Catholic universities in Brazil, which are private, not-for-profit universities, where you will find some research. And we have also what we call isolated schools, one faculty of this or of that, which are most of the higher education institutions in Brazil, and they're mostly private, and they mostly offer night courses. So many people work during the day and they study during the night. And of course, these institutions are not research institutions, and there are a few, only a handful, 37 federal vocational institutions. Actually, among the universities, they count the state of São Paulo has a network of vocational schools which have a name of a university, although they are not, and they are counted as universities. But grosso modo, that's what we find, a huge number of institutions, and half of the universities are public, half of the private universities are not-for-profit. When we look at the enrollment in these universities, the situation is very, very curious. Nearly 3/4 of our enrollment are in private institutions. 60 or 56% are in the for-profit institutions, and nearly 900,000 are in non-profit higher education institutions. And the public sector is here, and I'm stressing the public sector because most of the research is in the public sector. We have a little bit more than half of all the students in public institutions attending federal universities. All these universities whose names start with a UF are federal universities, which stands for Universidade Federal, and I have 525,000 students in state institutions and 100,000 in municipal institutions. Most of the research institutions of Brazil are either federal or some state or some non-profit private institutions. How do we select our undergraduate students? As I mentioned, in Brazil traditionally we have numerous clauses of places in the university, which is a very effective and convenient way of perpetuating social injustice, because we select our students by batteries of exams. Each university or each group of universities prepares a battery of exams related somehow to the high school programs, and we apply these tests to all the candidates they apply. To have an idea, in my university we had more than 60,000 applicants this year for 3,400 places, and we select only with basis on the results in these exams. There are a few private institutions who are innovating in this, and they are using other elements like interviews and so on, but in the public sector it's virtually impossible to select in a different way than by the grades people take in exams. So if you pay for a good primary or a good high school, your chances of being admitted in a public universities are much higher, and you eventually the public universities are strongly populated by the kids that came from private schools. However, for some reason in Brazil, the public perception of this process is very positive. Very often you listen to people who really believe it's a fair and it's the best process to select our students. I don't agree with it. I think we urgently need affirmative action procedures to have more social impact. And one initiative by the federal government that happened recently, a few years ago, was to establish a national test, just like the SAT in the United States, to offer a national test and use. But the difference is that still students would be selected only based on the grades that the students get in this test. However, this test has been plagued by serious methodological and especially logistic problems, like questions appeared somewhere. I mean, since people praise very much the getting into a public university, the questions of this test and the whole test became very coveted pieces of information, and we had tests stolen from the workshop where they were being printed and so on and so forth. So there's still a long way to go concerning the Brazilian national test, but it's a good move. But as I said, there is a very high selectivity in the public sector. If you look at in this figure, last year, this is from 2008, we had more than 2 million applicants for the whole public system in Brazil, and we offered less than 300,000, no, it's not, it was 200,000 candidates to less than 30,000 places, yeah. And if you look at the private sector, indeed they offered more places than candidates, but the enrollment is half the number of candidates. The system is self-adjusting, and the figures are very similar both in the for-profit and the non-profit sectors of higher education. So there is only competition, real competition, grosso modo, for the places in the public institutions. As I said, and this is the last words I say about undergraduate education, there is a national undergraduate exam which is used for accreditation procedures. The Ministry of Education proposes a battery of tests in different subjects for all students who are graduating in some areas now in Brazil. And based on the performance of the students in these tests, they published every year a ranking, and this is the ranking only for universities, not for isolated schools. And so these are the institutions you can see on the left. Luckily, my own institution is the top of the list, but here's the number of programs that were evaluated in 2010, and these results were published in 2011. And as you can see, most of the top universities in undergraduate ranked by this test in the undergraduate programs are federal universities, with a few, I think there are 1, 2, 3 state universities and 2 Catholic universities, the Catholic University of Rio and the Catholic University of São Paulo, which are 2 private, not-for-profit universities who rank top in this test for undergraduate students. There is one conspicuous absence. USP is not subject to this process because the state universities have to volunteer to take part in this process, and USP decided they would not be evaluated by the federal government in any way. Unicamp used to have this position, but we changed recently. So USP is not present, and most probably it would be among the top Brazilian universities. But there is a very good correlation between the education of undergraduates and the research activity in institutions. So research is always qualifying institutions, not only at the graduate level, but also at the undergraduate level. And I was talking a little bit about undergraduate because, of course, there's Science Without Borders program going on, and maybe we're going to talk a little bit about this also later. The graduate scenario, which is very relevant for research, is also very peculiar in Brazil. We only had a real graduate system established in the late 60s, between the late 60s and early 80s, during the 70s. And it all started with an infamous Sucupira report. He was a member of a council of education, and he prepared a report that he hoped would be the Brazilian Flexner report, and where he created what we call mestrado, which would correspond to the MSc, and a doutorado, which would correspond to the PhD. There are some curious areas, like in Brazil, we have PhD in art, for instance. Probably where we are one of the very few countries in the world where you can have PhD programs in art, not in art history, in art, and performing art and fine arts. With the establishment of a graduate system, which happened at the same time as the federal university system was established, we could guarantee financing for these programs through the Ministry of Education, whose agency coope is still one of the big financiers of graduate and also undergraduate studies, especially in international level. And the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation has CNPq, which is their branch to finance research and graduate education, and also undergraduate education. I have a scholarship program. And also there are state foundations. Probably you heard about FAPESP, which is the foundation of the São Paulo state. It's by far the largest state foundation for funding research. The current situation in Brazil is that we have 110,000 master students and 65,000 PhD students. These numbers are still very small for the size of the country and for the size of the country economics. As I said, it's 31 degrees outside. It's pretty warm. We'll have to have some water from time to time. If you take a look at the number of PhDs granted in Brazil, this number has been rising, especially after the early 90s. And it was rising at a steady state since the early 90s until now, until 2009, when apparently it's starting to decrease at 11,000. In Brazil, we are granting 11,000 PhDs every year. Very recently, in the last edition of the Shanghai ranking, we found out that apparently the University of São Paulo, USP, is the university which grants the highest number of PhD degrees in the world every year. But the important is to know that there are 11,000 new PhDs every year, and these PhDs have to be educated somewhere, of course, and this happens in the research universities. Brazil is graduating more PhDs than France, for instance, now every year. France graduates nearly between 7,000 and 8,000 new PhDs every year. So this is very important. So a very important opportunity for research is graduate student exchange. And it's, in our view, from a research university, we see graduate student exchange as something very different from undergraduate student exchange. And I'm stressing this because we heard often in the Science Without Border program, some of their officials believe you can do graduate exchange the same way you do undergraduate exchange. And from our point of view, graduate exchange should happen in a different basis. We like very much what coope calls a sandwich model, where students take 1 year of disciplines, normally 1 or 2 years of discipline, and then they go abroad to do research for 1 year, and then they return to Brazil. And what's very important is that the advisors in both sides must be in contact somehow. I mean, it should be a kind of joint cooperation, and it may sometimes become a co-tutelle or double degree schemes. But the only way to send graduate students abroad, and we've been doing this for a long time, is the most common model is researchers meet in a conference, they decide to do something together, we find funding and we send our students abroad. When you send a graduate student abroad, the research project and research activities are normally much more important than just going to classes, especially in the sciences. So the main objective of sending a student abroad is to let him live the experience of doing his research in a different laboratory, speaking a different language. And one consequence for this is cooperation in research. I mean, this is normally, the student exchange is a consequence of a research cooperation. The advisors meet and because they cooperate, they exchange students. There are now opportunities to go beyond the consequences of research cooperation and have student exchange as an inducer of research cooperation. I mean, if we could find frameworks where we could exchange students and have an advisor abroad, we could, in many areas, start research cooperation because we're exchanging students and they are doing research in our laboratories in different subjects. But to do this, we have to find common areas of interest, and there is in Brazil, you can find high-quality prospective partners almost everywhere. I mean, wherever there is a research university and there is a subject that is interesting to you, very often you're going to find research activities that are suitable for a long-term research project. One of the reasons of why we are successful in graduate studies, and I think Brazil did a much better job in graduate studies than in undergraduate studies, is the accreditation of these programs. CAPE's agency has been evaluating graduate programs already for 30 years, and they have committees for each area of knowledge that get together in Brasilia, and they do the evaluation of all programs in Brazil. I participated once in my area in physics. And normally we give a grade between 1 and 5. The programs that get 1 or 2 have to present indicators that they are going to improve their quality, otherwise they are going to not to be authorized anymore. Remember that in Brazil, both undergraduate and graduate scenarios are strongly regulated by the central government. And so we used to attribute grades between 1 and 5, and then someone had the idea that many programs in Brazil are of outstanding international quality, and they decided to introduce 6 and 7 as grades for the programs that comply with international standards. I was doing an exercise while preparing to this lecture, and it's incredible how much these programs are concentrated in the state of São Paulo. We have more than 160 programs with either 6 or 7 in the state of São Paulo, and the next state in number of programs with 6 or 7 is Rio de Janeiro, which has like 25 or 26, and then all the other states have less. This is something also that we have to cope, how to bring excellence and quality to the rest of Brazil. I mean, I'm not saying that there are no high quality programs in other states, but there is a very high concentration here in the state of São Paulo. So if we're talking about research, it's very important to realize how much is spent in R&D in the country. And these are the official numbers, official figures from the Ministry of Science and Technology and Innovation. And I'm afraid these figures are a bit overstated. According to the official figures, Brazil is spending 1.6% of its GNP in research and development. Most probably, these numbers are overrated by 0.5%. Most probably, we are spending between 1 and 1.2%, which is already a very reasonable number for a country like Brazil in R&D. And what's important is that lately, if you see, the participation of the private sector is increasing very much in the last few years. The size of the red bars is becoming bigger compared to the blue bars. And this is because of the institution of what we call sectorial funds. Whenever there are concessions for the private enterprises in services like telephony, electricity, petroleum, gas, whatever, the companies have to spend part of their profit in research. And this has been lately a very dynamic and important fund to foster research foster especially applied research here in Brazil. So as a consequence of what I was saying, and now we're getting to research, more than 2% of all index papers in the world were published by Brazilian authors or involving Brazilian authors in 2007. And this number is now near 3%, 2.76% of all the papers published in the world involve a Brazilian author. And that's very, very important if we look at how recent science and higher education system is in Brazil. This figure is from Thomson Reuters National Science Indicators from 2008. And then there is, in the Global Research Report of 2009, they showed the Brazilian share in different areas. Let me just draw here. If we take plant and animal science, for instance, Brazilian share is 3.9%. If we take physics, for instance, it's 2.28%. But we're normally concentrated in plant and animal science, agricultural science, microbiology, environmental ecology, pharmacology, and toxicology. Life sciences in general, it's where Brazil is excelling and is appearing in the world of scientific publications. And I think this is very important, and also in all areas, I think all but physics is the same. In all these areas, Brazilian share increased from the period 1998 to 2002 to 2007, 2008. In the sense, we are increasing our participation in the world in all areas where we are leading, which is where we are leading not, where we have an important participation. And I think this is really, really important. And it's a sign that cooperation, which is increasing very much, is a very good, it's a very important asset if we want to be, as I think we will be, an important scientific nation in the near future. It's very nice also to see who our partners are, and here 11% of all Brazilian papers have at least one partner in the United States. USA is our biggest partner, and then there are France, UK, Germany, Italy, and there here comes Canada with 2%, Spain, Argentina with 1.7%. Much of this cooperation is within the Americas. If you look, even Portugal, with whom we have a common language, their participation is rather small. And with Mexico too, because although we are both in Latin America, Mexico and Brazil have very different historical backgrounds, and this is bonds between Brazil and Mexico are something that we are just now starting to build in a more consistent basis. We still have a long way to go in cooperation with Mexico. But anyway, we are already cooperating, and we have research universities where cooperation can be increased very much. And this is something that I really wanted to show to you. It's I was in the Shanghai ranking conference, the annual ranking in 2009 in Shanghai, and these authors, Yin Cheng and Yan Kai, presented this graph, which I found very interesting, and not many people were aware of it. They plotted the number of top 500 universities in the Shanghai ranking, which is a research-only ranking, as a function of the GDP of the countries. And they tried to fit this with a straight line, which is a bit exaggerated, but all the countries somehow fall near these lines. And of course, the United States, the highest GDP in the world, have more than 100 or nearly 200 universities among the top 500. So they are in what they call more universities than what they should have. And Brazil is below this red line. Brazil is here. And so the idea is somehow to push Brazil to closer to the above this line. And the only way we can do this is through international cooperation in research. And Brazil now has only 6 universities among the top 500 in Shanghai ranking, and we certainly have space for more. Cooperation is certainly one of these ways. And what we've been doing in Unicamp lately, what I just call the Canadian invasion, is something that could be in principle open to many other Brazilian institutions. There are institutions where there is very serious and very relevant research going on in those areas that I just mentioned. To bring us to concluding remarks, I would like to point out some and I'm going to go very slowly now because this is very important. Student exchange is something that is absolutely new to Brazil. If you go to a Brazilian campus, only Portuguese is spoken and you see mostly Brazilian students. And that's a consequence, that's an unwanted consequence of a policy that Brazil had during the 70s and mainly in the 80s of limiting the education of our PhDs to Brazil. Until the 80s, it was very usual to send students abroad, especially graduate students. And then it became, when we created critical mass in some areas, we decided to educate our students in Brazil. And this had a consequence that most of the faculty members in all Brazilian universities are Brazilian, and most of the students are Brazilian. So to have foreign students as full grade students here is very difficult at the undergraduate level, because as you saw, especially in the public institution, there's a lot of competition for a place. I mean, it's very hard for a foreigner to go through this battery of tests that we applied here and have success. But student exchange is a relatively new concept in Brazil, international student exchange. And we are increasing it slowly. But for instance, in my university, we more than doubled the numbers in the last 5 years. And the expectation is to bring it to acceptable international level, to say, have 10% of our students in exchange. But the perception, the Brazilian perception of exchange has been much more Brazil to the world than the world to Brazil. So there is this program, Science Without Borders, that I'm sure that all of you heard about and know about many details. We already sent some students to the United States. Now we are sending to the UK and to Europe, and apparently there is a deal being signed with Canada soon. But the whole perception of this program is an outgoing program. I mean, it's not I don't understand it as a real exchange program. It's mostly a professional education program. The idea is to send our best science, technology, engineering, and mathematics students abroad to provide them an experience of being in another country, but there is no counterpart involved. So a very, very important part is what can we do on the other way around, to bring the world to Brazil, not only to bring Brazil to the world, because exchange and our perception here is that it should be a two-way street. It's useless for us just to send our students abroad. I know that many of you are going to fish some of our best students and keep them, which is absolutely legitimate action. But of course, we also want to keep our good students here. So we must find mechanisms not only to send our students abroad and to finance foreign students to come to Brazil, but then there are things that we need to do, and here I'm talking more to the Brazilian colleagues than to the foreign colleagues. We need to teach in English. Apparently, there is a taboo, even in the best research universities in Brazil, against teaching in English. I thought we would have started teaching in English at the undergraduate level here in Unicamp this March. We had problems. Hopefully, we're going to start to teach in English in August. But I know that the only way we can be competitive to attract students from undergraduate students from abroad is by offering the students the perspective of not having language as a problem. And I'm sure that they're going to learn Portuguese, as all our foreign students here do, in order to enjoy this international experience. So I think Brazil universities need to teach in English in order to be more attractive to exchange students. And we need to attract more foreign students and faculty. We need to make Brazil destination for international students. It's starting very slowly and not in all universities. And also we need to create a tradition of hiring foreign faculty members. Again, my university is started already a program. Now we have 6 foreign nationals teaching somewhere around this campus. And by the end of this year, there are going to be 20. And the idea is to bring foreign nationals to bring to our faculty a different view. Unicamp is not going to become an international university, but we would like to increase the number of foreign faculty members here. And I think many Brazilian universities are following this kind of lead. Then we must go beyond student exchange. I think student exchange is very nice for international cooperation, but it's very limited as far as knowledge, production of knowledge is concerned. Research universities must focus not their international activities not on student exchange, but we must go beyond. We need to have research partnerships. And this is something that we are trying now very strongly with some Canadian partners. We cannot do this with all foreign universities, but we are doing it with some universities which we identified as good prospective partners. And we are trying to not produce, we're trying to organize, and we are organizing some research workshops in specific areas of research of common interest. We did this with some American universities. We're doing this now with Canadian universities and with European and African universities later this year. And the idea is to try to foster partnerships in areas where there is not only interest, but there are relevant results on both sides, and for some reason the researchers are not in contact. The reason for this is that in Brazil we do have research universities, even in the, as qualified by the Shanghai ranking, there is a number of research universities where we have world-class programs. Not all Brazilian universities are world-class. Actually, there are very few world-class universities, but we can produce world-class science. The percentage of all the papers that are published involving Brazilian authors is a sign of that. We have people capable of solving relevant problems, scientific and social problems here. And there are, this I want to mark in, I don't know, in red if possible, because, yeah, in yellow. It is a very good time for funding opportunities. Brazilian federal agencies and Brazilian state agencies are all, they do have resources to finance international cooperation, and they are putting as part, because of Science Without Borders, one of the reactions, for instance, of the São Paulo FAPESP agency is to provide funding to send their even their undergraduate research students abroad for a period. Now when we submit a project for undergraduate or graduate scholarship with the São Paulo Foundation, it is expected to include as part of the education of the student some time abroad. So funding for a student exchange is plenty. Funding for research project is very, very abundant as well. To the point that all of these workshops that we are organizing in this university, the last session is dedicated to writing projects and getting money to make these exchanges happen and to go to research results. Just to mention, in my own area, we have open research facilities that are very relevant. 4 kilometers from where I'm sitting now, there is a world-class synchrotron lab where we can perform experiments, and I myself am a user of the machine. And it's an open facility, open to foreign cooperation, and very practical to access here from Brazil. This is more or less what I wanted to talk to you about cooperation, and I hope to see you soon in Rio. Those who go to Rio perhaps will be able to see this scene. I cannot guarantee it's going to happen during your stay there, but it's some people who were there in the last few years claim they saw it. So I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'd like to continue with questions or comments that you have. Nicholas? Hello.
Profesor Leandro, lo que pasa que le rogaría si usted fuera tan amable de...
Hi, Mr. Tesla. This is Nicholas speaking.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I missed the part. I was looking at my emails.
All right. It all happens.
All right, so well, in all cases, I really want to thank you for the time you took today to explain to us a little bit how the internationalization of research is going on in Brazil. And as I said before, I think it was a really appropriate and interesting webinar in this context that we're having now as organizers of the Conference of the Americas. And I hope it gave to all participants an idea of all the opportunities of collaboration that there are right now with Brazil and in Brazil. And these opportunities will be deepened again in this Conference of the Americas I've been mentioning. I will be writing our website down the page so you can have an idea of what I'm referring to. But maybe if you would want to take 10 or 15 minutes for questions or additional remarks.
There are already two questions, one by David Schallenberger and one by Elisa Vilkanen. So I will go answering as they appear. So David is asking, can I focus on cooperation in the hard sciences, and what about the social science, whether there are opportunities? Of course there are. Again, it depends on which area of social sciences and which area of in which university we're talking about. In my university, for instance, we have a long-term cooperation in social sciences, especially with European and with some American universities, and again within Latin America. However, there should be a word of caution that in social sciences, not everybody is fluent in English. Uh, for historical reasons here. So the one important point is where to find funding for cooperation in social sciences. In the state of São Paulo, the FAPESP Foundation would pay yeah, that's better without some open mic here. FAPESP Foundation would pay for research projects in any areas, provided you give indicators of progress and you have a clear objective in the end. The federal agencies, CAPES, doesn't have any special program on social science as much as I know, or CNPq, because they're mostly turned to hard sciences. But you can use sometimes the sectorial funds to fund some projects in social science which have social impact, and then it's easier. It's harder to find financing for more abstract humanities projects, but again, if there are scientific outcomes, normally you can you eventually find financing. Just to give examples that I know because they're close to me, there is a huge program on history of art connecting researchers in my university and some other universities in Brazil and groups in Italy and who do research on Renaissance pictures and artists. And very soon we're going to have one big graduate student school, international school, it's about to be announced, on the dissemination of culture in the 19th century, where we can pay for the tickets for a graduate student from all the world to come to here. It's going to be in Campinas, and I talked about this with one of the organizers a few days ago. And so we're going to bring students here. It's going to be a school, a workshop, a formal workshop, where the idea is that people have contact and can find common interest areas to work. So, of course, most of the funding is directed to hard science, but there are opportunities in the humanities. For Elisa, who asked the various funding schemes, yeah. Most, again, internationalization is a very recent endeavor in Brazil. So most of the money that you find for research is provided by the federal agencies, either CAPES or CNPq. CAPES only pays personal, they pay scholarships, and they normally do not fund research projects. CNPq does open what they call universal calls, where they call for projects of different size. Normally they have three bands of values. Something they can go up to 50,000 reais, small projects, where you can apply for money. Well, you write your project, you apply for money, and you may involve in this money in this project's international cooperation or not. A very important source in the last few years has been the sectorial fund. There are funds where they are paying for networking or for solving problems which are specific for one area of knowledge or other, normally related to the area in which the companies which are providing the money is related. Now, international funds is recent, and especially the state foundations, and that's more or less restricted to the state of São Paulo. FAPESP has been signing contracts with agencies abroad, and not always agents, sometimes with the universities abroad, and the rule is whichever money your agency puts, they match. And then they create international funds so that we can apply for research projects. Our experience is that the rejection rate in these Brazilian agencies for good projects is very low. If you have a good project and you have solid background and it's clear that you're going to get results, chances are that you're going to be funded. The way these international funding opportunities are showing up are normally through calls. In Portuguese we call editais, or in Spanish the word is, I like it very much, I can't remember now. But there are open calls that are published to bid for the money. And if you take a look at the page of CNPq, which is in Portuguese, unfortunately, or of FAPESP, you're going to find several of these call for applications for these different projects. And nowadays, whichever project has an international component has much higher chances of being approved. I think that's more or less, I hope I helped in understanding the situation. So are there other comments? You're welcome, Elisa. Oh, I can write. It's www.cnpq.gov.br. Perhaps there is no gov. I think it's just cnpq.br. Or perhaps, well, we can try. And the other one is www.capes. In this one, we have gov.br. And there is fapesp.br. But FAPESP is restricted to the state of São Paulo. Each state has its own research foundation, and Again, the state of São Paulo has a lot of peculiarities that perhaps I may try to clarify to you. As I mentioned, most of the research universities in Brazil are federal universities in the sense that they are regulated and financed by the federal government. However, the state of São Paulo has a very important state university system, which consists of University of São Paulo, USP, Unicamp, and UNESP, the three state universities of São Paulo. And the state guarantees for these three universities 10.57% of its tax revenue, of sales tax revenue, which in Unicamp gets 2.2% of this, and last year it was more than $1 billion, more than 1 billion American dollars. So we are in a very special situation here, and more than that, the state puts another 1% of its sales tax revenue to sponsor FAPESP, the foundation. So we are in a very special possibility. Yeah, Alberto, no, sectorial funds, I forgot. Sectorial funds are, sometimes they show up in CNPq, but there's also FINEP. Again, I don't know if there is gov.br or only finep.br. This is a branch of the Ministry of Science and Technology. The sectorial funds, the information about sectorial funds is normally found in the Ministry of Science and Technology, and now it's also called Science, Technology and Innovation. So this is where you're going to find, but normally the sectorial funds are run by the Ministry of Science and Technology, but they are the calls are often appear in FINEP site, which is a financer for projects, not only basic research, but also mostly for applied research projects. Well, there's one question more coming. Yeah, BNDES, Brazilian colleague asked. There is a bank for financing the development of the country called BNDES. And they have funds, but normally their funds are not for research. They are funds for enterprises that want to build whatever. They need to finance an expansion on a new idea or so on. But it's not risk capital, it's not risk fund. So BNDES, I wouldn't say it's a fund for research. It's a fund for industrial expansion and for services expansion. It's a fund to make the economics of the country run rather than a research opportunity. I didn't mention also, there is another opportunity for research, but it's also, in most of Brazil is incipient with the exception of a few universities, and this is one of these few exceptions, which are the innovation agencies, the university innovation agencies, where we have innovative ideas that come from the universities, and we help startup companies to be established, and they can find sometimes some venture capital for this, and very, very often the small companies have international cooperation involved in their operations, and it's a different opportunity, but it's very restricted to very, very few. I think there should be 5 or 6 universities who have active research, who have active innovation agencies. How are Brazilian? That's a good question. It depends, Carmela. To be sincere, I tell my graduate students in physics that it's more important to learn English than to learn quantum mechanics, because they're going to learn quantum mechanics in English anyway. English teaching is a problem in Brazil due to the lack of well-prepared teachers and to the lack of tradition of studying English, and also due to the relative isolation Brazil had over the years. It's incredible how much in the last 5 years, English entered in our lives through internet or through cable TV, or because I heard from a friend who was a consultant for the World Bank here in Brazil that he asked about, why don't you teach your students in English? And the answer was, why? Everybody speaks Portuguese. So English teaching is a problem, and the federal government realized this with the Science Without Borders project. Of all students that we submitted from Unicamp, that we submitted for a place in Science Without Borders, all the ones which were turned down were because of lack of English knowledge. Here in Unicamp, we provide basic English lessons, but that's normally not enough for a student. We have to find different ways. My personal my personal feeling is that we will have teaching undergraduate courses in English is going to be a way for our students to learn English as well as learning the subject. Carmela claims that high class have good English. Yeah, but you know, higher class is higher class. There are very in Brazil. I was responsible for admissions in Unicamp for a long time, so I could correlate performance in English with family income, and the correlation is really good. It's 1-to-1. I mean, in Brazil, higher class people are exposed to English, have good knowledge of English. Sometimes they go abroad, but that's not enough. I think we need an internationalization of higher education will be one way for this. I mean, we really need to have more and more and more knowledge of English among our elite and our students. I personally believe that the best that could be done, the main consequence of sending so many students abroad is to opening the universities for English. I am the director of international office here, and when I arrived, I had only 2 of my staff who spoke English. Now there are 5, which is not a big deal, but somehow Brazilians, that's people who have been to Brazil or who are coming to Brazil will realize that Brazilians are very proud of being Brazilian, and they identify Portuguese with their homeland, which is, I don't like it, but that's the way it is. And, some people claim it's against the Constitution to teach in English, which is obviously not true. And there's a lot of mix-up. Normally, people take a defensive stance. Since they don't speak very good English, they say English is not important. But clearly, in the labor market, speaking English makes your salary raise by an important amount. I mean, Carmela is correct. Many of the higher class people do speak English here, but we must work on that. And then there is an opportunity also of English as a second language programs that I think will become more and more relevant here in Brazil. Sergio agrees with me. I mean, yeah, it's a problem. When you come to Rio, you see taxi drivers don't have a clue of English. Many people who should speak English, clerks in the airport won't speak English, and so on. It is a problem. But on the other hand, people are very much willing to help you. So very often here in the universities, in the campus, someone who speaks only English comes on, and people drag them here to the international office so that you can help them. Yeah, Nicola is doing a subliminal pub there.
Hi, Nicholas again. Sorry for spamming the chat. It's a little bit of information I was I was wanting to give to all participants. So unless there are more questions, we would need to conclude the webinar. We're almost at 1 and 15 minutes. As per the PowerPoint that we'll be sending this very soon, either today or tomorrow. We'll be sending the PowerPoint and the recording of today's webinar if you want to have a look at it again. And yes, unless Mr. Tesla has anything else to add, we would conclude this webinar for today. And we really look forward to count on your presence during the next webinar,